Hello, you're on the Ruslan Belov channel. Today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine as of May 2nd, 2025. A large number of events occurred today, so let's get started. We'll begin with the South Donetsk direction, where the armed forces of the Russian Federation continue their offensive toward the settlement of Bohatyr. Some neutral cartographers, as well as certain pro-Russian experts, note that the Russian armed forces have managed not only to enter the southeastern part of the settlement of Bohatyr, but also to consolidate their positions and expand their control zone. By the end of May 2025, the Russian army is estimated to control approximately 10% of Bohatyr. Let me remind you that the offensive toward this settlement, more precisely, the final decisive offensive, began around April 26, 2025. Since the 26th, we've been updating the map almost daily, and at a very fast pace, marking significant areas in favor of the Russian armed forces, which in turn confirms the likelihood that the Ukrainian side has decided to retreat. Looking at the settlement of Bohatyr right now, we see that the Russian army controls the southeastern part. A key strongpoint located at the road intersection remains under the control of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, AFU. This stronghold is crucial for the Ukrainian defense because it allows them to maintain evacuation and rotation of their forces in the northern part of the settlement. As for the northern part of Bohatyr, it is regularly hit by Russian airstrikes and artillery. This means that the entire section of the front and this part of the settlement are under full fire control by the Russian armed forces. Overall, we see that the Ukrainian side is trying to stay as far as possible from the southeastern part of Bohatyr. Avoiding direct engagement, it appears Ukrainian soldiers are on standby, waiting for an order to retreat. However, judging by previous battles, such an order may not come anytime soon. Most likely, Ukrainian command will hold their troops in the northern part of Bohatyr as long as possible. At the same time, Ukrainian troops may retreat not only to the west, but also northward toward the settlement of Alexeyevka, which is likely what will happen. Now we move on to the Pokrovsk section of the front, where we're also receiving a large number of important updates. Let's begin with the settlement of Novo Leandrika. It's a small village with just one street, located to the west of the settlement of Uspennivka, where fighting ended only recently. According to various sources, both pro-Russian experts and neutral cartographers, the Russian armed forces have entered the territory of the village, and by the end of May 2025, they control approximately 20% of it. Heavy fighting is currently ongoing, but the Russian army is slowly advancing. I'll remind you that the offensive on this section of the front also began around the 20th of April. We've been updating the map daily to the north of Hanativka, and we can see that the advance toward Novo Leandrika came from the south, along the tree lines between Hanativka, Novo Leandrika, and Uspennivka. This is how we've been adjusting the map daily, and it seems the AFU's defenses south of Novo Leandrika were not prepared for prolonged resistance. Next, we turn to the most important news of the last 24 hours, geolocations we've begun to receive from the settlement of Pokrovsk. The footage we're about to look at was published yesterday evening, on May 1st, 2025, after our video review for May 1st was already released. According to the author of the video and pro-Ukrainian sources, we can observe Ukrainian forces destroying an entire building in the southern part of Pokrovsk. Possibly not just one building, but an entire complex. The author claims that Russian soldiers were present in the area at the time. This news immediately exploded across the internet and Telegram and among all communities following the war, because everyone started asking, what exactly is this? Is this a sign that regular Russian army units are entering southern Pokrovsk, with assault units gradually infiltrating the settlement? Or is it the work of a Russian sabotage reconnaissance group, SRG? Opinions were split, and no consensus has been reached. All day today, people have been waiting for more updates, perhaps more footage, to confirm what exactly happened. Did Russian units indeed enter Pokrovsk and hold positions, or was it just a raid by an SRG? This is important information. Some very credible pro-Russian experts and cartographers have confirmed the presence of Russian troops in this southern neighborhood. But the key point here is that Pokrovsk consists of separate districts, and we're talking about this southern district. We can already see that the status of this area has changed. Just a month ago, it was under confident control of the Ukrainian armed forces, and there was no doubt that Ukraine fully held several blocks here. But today, that certainty is gone. We now see that Russian SRGs are freely infiltrating southern Pokrovsk and gradually expanding the control zone, potentially preparing a foothold for future assaults by regular troops. What matters is that, starting from May 1, 2025, the Ukrainian side no longer holds secure control over this part of the settlement. This area likely should already be marked as a grey zone, and the situation here is shrouded in the fog of war. Regardless of the current confusion, we believe the situation will become clearer in the next few days. But if the Russian army has indeed begun a full-scale offensive here, it would mark a major media victory for Russia's forces ahead of May 9th. Now let's move on to the eastern flank of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, where we're also receiving a flood of updates. The map here is filled with icons and notable color changes. Let's go step by step, starting with the settlement of Malanka. Just last night, a short post was published on the social media platform X. In that post, 3 photos were shared showing the work of a Western OSINT analyst who attempted to geolocate a destroyed Russian MTLB armored vehicle. It is the Western OSINT analyst and blogger who claims that over the past several days, the Russian army has repeatedly attempted to advance toward the settlement of Malanka using columns of armored vehicles. Some of the equipment was destroyed. However, according to pro-Western sources, part of the convoy managed to break through and enter the territory of Malanka. At the moment, fighting is ongoing. No additional information has been published so far, but based on this OSINT analyst's publication, the majority of pro-Russian, neutral and pro-Ukrainian mappers have begun making adjustments to their maps. This is what neutral independent cartographers are showing, and pro-Russian sources indicate a fairly wide area of control in the southeastern and eastern parts of the settlement of Malanka. Let me remind you that, in our view, this is precisely where the main battle will take place. We are seeing that the Russian side is taking control of the most important and strategic positions with almost no resistance in preparation for the upcoming battle. Also, take note of the significant territorial gain north of Chassiva. This is not just about Russian units advancing or expanding their zone of control. This represents a breach in the Ukrainian armed forces' defenses. A small portion of the front line has collapsed in the direction of the settlement of Hanativka along the H-32 highway. Just last night, pro-Russian sources published this footage. In the video, we can see a series of drone strikes, first on a reinforcement convoy moving toward the settlement of Novo Leandrika, then on artillery positions, followed by mortar crews. In the footage, we can also observe FPV drone strikes on a base that likely served as a temporary deployment site for Ukrainian FPV drone operators. Immediately after this sequence of clearing actions, footage emerged showing the movement of Russian units and assault operations. In these clips, we can observe a large number of Russian soldiers advancing toward Novo Leandrika on foot and on motorcycles. We see Russian troops entering buildings in the village, systematically clearing one structure after another. It's actually a strange video. Based on the footage and available control data, no more than 30 Russian soldiers entered Novo Leandrika. In the final frames, we see Ukrainian units hastily withdrawing from the combat zone after Russian troops entered the village. Whether the Ukrainian side was caught off guard or a section of the front line collapsed in the fields is unclear, but the Russian forces managed to enter Novo Leandrika from the eastern side of the river. Once the Ukrainian side realized what was happening, they quickly retreated to more fortified positions somewhere to the north. Based on this footage, the majority of mapping services, both neutral and pro-Russian, updated their maps, marking a vast area as being under the control of the Russian armed forces. This is how the maps looked yesterday across almost all platforms, regardless of their allegiance in the conflict. But today the area being marked has expanded significantly northward. This is a very important advance for Russian forces as it finalizes the formation of the western flank, the defensive line, before a potential large-scale offensive into the pocket between the settlements of Oleksandropil, Zaria, Romanivka, and Hanativka, south of the Klebenbik Reservoir. Of course, if we turn to pro-Ukrainian cartographers, They are in no hurry to update their maps. Yes, they do show that Tarasivka is fully under Russian control. Yes, they reflect a significant grey zone around Nova Poltavka, Malanivka, and toward Nova Leandrika. However, Ukrainian sources are still not ready to mark these areas as lost, even with available visual confirmation. Moreover, pro-Ukrainian sources provide their own analysis, claiming that the Russian advance toward Novo Leandrika was halted and that Russian forces retreated. The status of the offensive toward Novopoltavka remains unclear. Ukrainian sources confirm that Russian units did enter the village. But to this day, it's uncertain. Either communication with Ukrainian units was lost, or they are intentionally withholding bad news. It's hard to say what's really happening, and the Ukrainian side is not commenting. The same applies to the situation in Malanivka. It's difficult to assess what exactly is unfolding there, but we updated the map because we have visual confirmation. It appears that at this moment, the Ukrainian forces are holding on to a final line of defense located between a series of reservoirs. This is a network of fortified positions between Novopoltavka, Berezivka, and Nova Leandrika. It is precisely here where the Ukrainian side had planned to halt the Russian advance, coming from Berezivka. However, we now see that Russian forces have successfully flanked this key strongpoint. And if Russian units manage to fully secure Nova Leandrika, they will be in a strong position to strike the Ukrainian defensive network from the north, a move that could lead to the complete collapse of the Ukrainian defense along the H-32 highway. At that point, it would be very difficult to predict where the Ukrainian forces could stop further Russian advances. Although stop might not be the right word anymore, perhaps slow down is more accurate. There are also reports that Russian units have begun moving toward the pocket. And as of now, according to some pro-Russian cartographers, fighting is already taking place on the outskirts of the settlement of Oleksandropil. On the other hand, combat activity has intensified between Russian units and the Ukrainian army along the Sukhaya Balka line, moving further north toward Romanivka. Pro-Ukrainian mappers are heavily shading the area on the map. This is what the map looked like as of the evening of May 1, 2025. By the end of May 2nd, the Russian army had made significant advances in the open fields, and currently the distance between the forward positions of the Russian army and the settlement of Romanivka is less than 2 kilometers. In other words, this is the result of just one day's advancement. However, along the N20 road, a large number of Ukrainian fortified positions have been dug in, so it is unlikely that Russian troops will be able to cover this distance in a single day. It may take several more days. Meanwhile, footage has emerged from the settlement of Hanativka. The Russian army continues clearing operations in the area using artillery and drones, but without active ground combat for now. The last major update we had from this part of the front was the Russian advance from the village of Kalinov into the southern part of Stara Mykolaiivka. Next, we move to the Touretk section of the front. We are now seeing more and more footage from the mine located in the northwestern part of the area. Several videos were published today. Let's take a look. In this footage, released by Russian sources, we can see a Ukrainian armored vehicle, the Kazakh, stuck near the mine. Once Russian forces spotted the immobilized Ukrainian vehicle, they began targeting it. According to Russian sources who published this footage, the mine was under full control of the Russian armed forces at the time of the attack. The Ukrainian side had attempted to use this Kazakh vehicle to counterattack in an effort to regain control over certain positions and to prepare for possible counteroffensives to push back Russian troops. It's unclear how this operation ended. The Kazakh vehicle was destroyed at the scene. A few hours later, another video was released, showing another strike on Ukrainian positions within the mine, specifically in the area where the Kazakh had been destroyed. Apparently, according to footage from objective monitoring, Ukrainian units did manage to break into the mine and take control of one of its large structures. As of now, following the seizure of that facility, the Russian army is working to push Ukrainian forces out of this area. Still, over time, we've seen more and more footage showing how the battle for initiative at this mine gradually shifted in favor of the Russian side. Currently, the initiative is fully in Russian hands. What we are seeing now is the final stage of clearing out this stronghold, which is strategically important to both Russian and Ukrainian forces. Once secured, it would open up operational space for Russian troops to move northwest toward Klebanbik and the Klebanbik Reservoir. Considering the breakthrough and collapse of Ukrainian defenses on the western flank, losing control over the eastern side could lead to catastrophic consequences for Ukrainian forces currently trapped south of the Klebanbik Reservoir. Now let's move on to the Chassiva front. Over the past few days, the Russian army had been advancing rapidly, and we saw many updates from various sources. However, we are now observing a slowdown. The pace of the offensive has clearly dropped, and the Russian army is no longer pushing forward as actively in this area. The reasons are not yet clear. It's uncertain whether a new phase of the offensive is planned. What is clear, however, is that the Russian army has shifted its focus. Instead of pushing west to fully secure the town of Chassiva, the focus has shifted north to expand control along the Civoski Donets Donbass Canal. In recent days, we've received a large volume of footage and information from this area. The Russian armed forces appear to be working to expand their zone of control and establish a broader bridgehead along the canal. At present, the distance between the southern Ukrainian positions and the northern Russian positions along the canal is about 10 kilometers. Based on geolocated footage and other publications, the Russian army is likely trying to widen that bridgehead to at least 20 kilometers. This would allow them to launch a broader offensive toward Kostiantynivka and Oleksandro-Druzhkivka. Today we also have new footage slightly west of the village of Hiharivka. These show Ukrainian counterstrikes targeting Russian forward positions in the forested area near Hiharivka. Based on this footage, most mappers have updated their maps. Just yesterday, this forested area was marked either as contested or under control of Ukraine's 56th Brigade. Today, it's clear that the Russian army controls the majority of this forest and is continuing its advance west toward the canal. In the Civosk sector, there have been no changes. We now head to the Lyman direction. Today, we've made significant adjustments on the map. Information about Russian advances into the settlement of Touretk has been confirmed by numerous sources, both pro-Russian and neutral. Pro-Ukrainian sources remain silent. There is also new footage from Ukrainian forces, either the 60th or 63rd Brigade, showing drone strikes on Russian soldiers advancing through the settlement. This footage is being used by OSINT communities to justify shading the map accordingly. In the video, we see what is claimed to be a Russian motorcyclist moving through Touretk from north to south, and a drone strike targets him. However, the video is somewhat ambiguous. One detail that stands out is the white armband visible on the motorcyclist's right thigh. This may suggest that he is not a Russian soldier at all, possibly a Ukrainian soldier using a captured bike, returning to Ukrainian positions and mistakenly hit by friendly fire. At this point, it's hard to say definitively. There's just not enough information. Regardless, the map shading in this area more or less reflects the actual dynamics of the recent Russian offensive toward Lyman. As for the northern and central Kupiansk directions, there were no major updates over the past 24 hours. Russian artillery and aviation remain active, but there have been no ground advances. Now we move to the Sumy direction, where there are some noteworthy updates. Let's start with the Kursk region. Today, Russian sources released footage showing Russian soldiers raising a flag, likely representing one of the units that fought in this area, near the state border. At this location, the flag of the Russian army was raised, and it appears that Russian units have reached the state border. There are still some grey zones and areas under Ukrainian control, but we can see the Ukrainian bridgehead in this region gradually shrinking. We also have updates from the settlement of Belov. Today, both pro-Russian and neutral cartographers have reported progress in this area. As of the end of May 2, 2025, according to unverified but circulating information, Russian forces now reportedly control about 80% of Belov and continue moving toward the village of Hanativka. We're witnessing how Russian troops are closing in on Hanativka, which marks the first significant target in Sumy Oblast, now approached from at least 4 directions: northwest, north, northeast, and east. And that's all for now, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and take care.